Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESG CV. My name is Taylor Bilbrey and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. And as a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for the public record. Office hours recordings are on the California ESG CV past trainings webpage, and a copy of the slide deck and the recording will also be emailed to you. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers if possible throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered into the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESG CV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the Q&A session. Today's office hours agenda includes the following: ESG resources and ESG CV updates, office hour updates, upcoming trainings, ESG CV question and answer, and a spotlight series presentation regarding ESG and CoC Collaboration. At this time, I will hand it over to Anthony for the ESG updates.
Thank you, Taylor. And if you could just let me know, I've been having trouble with my internet. If I start sounding too robotic or you cutting out, just let me know and I'll turn off my video. That usually helps. Welcome, everyone. Happy Wednesday, June 14th. And as you can see by the slide, we're going to talk about briefly the ESG annual performance reporting. The first due date is tomorrow. About 2 weeks ago, we sent out emails to all of the grantees letting them know about the annual reporting requirement. And for those of you who are new to ESG annual reporting, it is a federal state requirement. We put the slide up here just so you can see that we really mean it. We have to do it and it's required. And as the state recipient for federal funding, HCD is required to collect reporting information for the grants we manage, and we're held accountable for that. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we sent the emails out notifying grantees the reporting time periods. The first book is due tomorrow. Most of you have that submitted already, but for those of you who are still working on it or may need a little help, please reach out to your rep or give us a call or contact us on the NOFA inbox, and we can help you get that completed by tomorrow, the due date, June 15th. And then the process outlined here, we're going to then have the next 3 workbook by July 15th. So approximately a month from now. And next slide, please. This slide is for your information, just a general walkthrough, detailed information on what is due in the process for submitting them. I won't go through these details. This was included in the emails we sent you. And we have it on this slide too, so you can go back and reference it once we send out the office hour slides. And of course, once again, always contact your reps. So tomorrow you have a workbook 1 due. You submit only 1 workbook covering all the contracts provided in the email your HCD rep sent you. It's pretty straightforward. It's probably the simplest and quickest part of this process. And then up next, we'll have workbook 2, workbook 3, part 1, and then workbook 3, part 2. Next slide, please. So just another reminder that we have to do this. We are required statutorily to do this, and also federal regulations require it. And so we will be enforcing it. And if you're not able to complete it in time, there is a possibility you could be out of compliance, which could affect your grant awards and your RFF funding. So please work with us. Let us know how we can help you. For additional questions, or your ESG rep or the NOFA inbox, and we will be happy to walk you through the process. It's very straightforward and should not be a problem at all. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a reminder on the the contract year awards. It's much easier to discuss them by contract year, and 2021's The expenditure deadline is quickly approaching, so work with us if you have any challenges with spending, or if you need to do an amendment, move money to another program, please let us know. 2022, the ESG awards were announced and contracts will begin routing in the next week or so. So good news, we're looking forward to that. And the 2023 ESG annual NOFA, we anticipate that being released by mid-July at the latest. And just in general, there will be about 60 days to complete that application. So July, August, September. And just a note for those of you who it's already probably ringing in your brain, we realize that a lot of our county COCs, they go dark during July, August. And you won't have your board meeting, your governing board meetings. And that's not going to be a problem. We're used to working with that. It's pretty standard this time of year. And we can assist you with that. We can always do a placeholder as long as it's consistent with what we're asking for. We can then fill in the blanks when your board gets back in September. And no worries, just work with us on that one. And next slide, please. Just a standard reference. All of our policy documents are on the ESG web page under the resources tab, and we're always adding to that. Great source of information for all of our policies and program requirements. And next slide, please. And always feel free to reach out to us at the NOFA inbox or from your ESG team representatives, myself, Diana, Giovanni, and Tuesday. And that's all we have until next week. So thank you all so much, and let us know if you need help with those APRs.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And let us go through some ESG CV updates at this time. Reminders for performance milestones. All program funds for projects such as street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention must be expended by September 30th, 2023. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. And final requests for funds must be submitted to the department by November 15th, 2023. Additional reminders while planning for ESG CV closeout. Spend down timing. Know when you're approaching the end and know that most funds are due to be spent by 9/30/2023. So don't spend too fast, but time it just right. Funding continuity. Consider HAP funding and other funding streams that will allow you to continue to serve clients after closeout. Closing intake. Set dates and deadlines to stop accepting clients and client intakes to prepare final rapid rehousing assistance. Staffing issues. Just like we need to make sure we're not leaving participants with nowhere to go, we also need to make sure we are thinking of ways to keep staff employed. Client issues, make sure you involve and inform participants timely before assistance ends so they can prepare as well. No clients should become homeless because a program is closing. And we will now move over to some office hour updates. Upcoming office hours topics, June 21st, DOB and supplementation, fraud and risk management. On June 28th, we have procurement and best practices. And on July 5th, we will have no office hours session. New HCD office hours training access. We have a couple of new links for you, and those will be dropped in the chat. And as always, if you have questions or any issues with your links, always reach out to your grant administrator and we will help get you to the right place. Some other upcoming trainings for June. On June 22nd at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we have HMIS Data Quality Program Management Session 2 as part of our community workshop series. And this session will focus on the data quality aspects of timeliness and consistency, and talk through the components through the lens of a comprehensive DQMP. Oh, and that wraps us up for the first part of our session today. Any questions at this time? I do see we have a question. Let me make sure there weren't any other ones. I believe a couple of these are for Anthony. Let me make sure Veronica's was the first one. I believe it was. Veronica asks, have the 2022 ESG award announcements been posted publicly yet? I don't see it under awards on the HCD ESG webpage.
Thank you, Taylor. No, they have not been posted to the ESG website yet. Grantees were notified directly by HCD ESG staff via email.
Thank you. We have another question from Kendall. Did a previous slide state that ESG 2023 NOFA would be released in July? And it looks like you already answered that one in the chat. So the answer, if nobody saw the chat, was yes, the ESG 2023 NOFA will be released in early to mid-July. You also answered Veronica's in the chat, which I now see. I apologize. But it's always good to go over them verbally too. It never hurts. We have one more question from Elvert. I have a question about HUD home inspections. What part of the house should be inspected? If the person we are assisting is renting a 1-bedroom, are we to inspect the entire house? Do we want to push that to the later session, or did someone want to jump on and answer Elvert's question?
Taylor, I think let's push that down to after we do our spotlight discussion.
Okay, thanks, Erin. Elvert, we will get to your question as soon as we open it up. Thank you for your question. As always, you can contact us if you have further questions. Your annual ESG folks can be reached at their individual emails or at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. And for ESGCB, please reach out to your grant administrator. And at this time, I will pass it over to Erin and Mike for our ESG and CoC Collaboration Spotlight session.
Thanks, Taylor. I'm not sure if we have Michael Thomas with us or not.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, you weren't on my list of people under me, Mike. Sorry about that. I'm Erin Rutherford. I am a ESG CV grant administrator, and I'm here today with Michael Thomas to talk about ESG and CoC collaboration. Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Erin. So Mike Thomas, use he, him pronouns. I am a technical assistance provider with ICF. And yeah, here to talk about CoC and ESG collaboration. So we can go ahead and jump right into that. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to talk about are coordination requirements. I do want to note we're going to do this primarily through the lens of California HCD and their state ESG entitlement and the policy that they have implemented to carry out coordination. So what you'll notice throughout this is there are places where the program rules might refer to the ESG recipient. There are places where HUD guidance might refer to ESG recipient. In most of those places here, we've replaced the term ESG recipient with California HCD because that's the relevant context here. And so we'll talk about the requirements that exist in the program rules, but then we're going to go through the specific policy that California HCD has adopted to meet those requirements. Next slide, please. So an overall summary of the coordination requirements as they exist in the program rules. So the ESG and CoC program interim rules require ESG recipients like California HCD and COCs to coordinate on 3 main areas. The first is coordinated assessment. The second is written standards. And the third is planning and reporting for the ESG program. Next slide, please. So here we're going to go into a little more detail about what those coordination requirements are based on HUD guidance that's been published in respect to the 3 topic areas that I just mentioned. So for coordinated assessment, what we know is that each ESG funded program or project within a COC's area must ensure that the COC's coordinated assessments, or I'm sorry, must use the COC's coordinated assessment system. So in other words, all ESG funded projects have to use the coordinated assessment system in the COC where they are operating. California HCD or its subrecipients must work with the COC to ensure the screening, assessment, and referral of program participants is consistent with ESG written standards. California HCD must describe each COC's coordinated assessment system in the ESG specific section of its annual action plan. So for those of you delivering services, that's not entirely relevant for you, but you should be aware that California HCD does have that responsibility for their action plan. And each COC is required to consult with California HCD to establish and operate a coordinated assessment system that provides an initial comprehensive assessment of the needs of individuals and families for housing services. So again, I know we just said each COC has to do that. No, there are a lot of COCs in California. So later in the presentation, we're going to get into the details of what that looks like based on HCD's policy. Next slide, please. The language is a little simpler for written standards. Basically, this exists in the ESG program interim rule, which says each COC is required to consult with HCD to establish and consistently follow written standards for providing COC assistance. We know that written standards are required for both the COC and ESG programs. This requirement is pulled specifically from the COC program interim rule. And again, we'll talk a little bit about what that interaction looks like based on the policy in a few moments. Next slide, please. And then finally, planning and reporting for the ESG program. So this one, it has a lot of information. But again, as we talk through the policy, I think you'll see how that's going to play out. But here's what the program rules and the guidance say. HCD is required to consult with each COC to determine how to allocate ESG funds, how to develop performance standards for projects and activities that they fund with that, and then evaluate the outcomes of projects and activities that are funded with ESG, and then develop funding policies and procedures for the administration and operation of the COC's HMIS. In the annual action plan, HCD has to describe its consultation with each COC in addressing the topics that we are talking through here. In the ESG specific portion of the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, or CAPER, that's a report that HCD has to submit annually. They must include in a form prescribed by HUD, the number of persons assisted, types of assistance provided, and project or program outcomes data measured under the performance standards that were developed in consultation with each COC. So in other words, the performance standards we talked about in the first bullet up there then have to be reported to HUD through the CAPER process. Each COC must consult with HCD on its plan for allocating ESG program funds, reporting on the performance of ESG funded projects and evaluating the performance of ESG funded projects. So what we're seeing here is basically that coordination requirement for allocating ESG funds and developing performance standards and all of that. It exists in both the ESG program interim rule and the COC program interim rule. So that's why you're seeing those very similar bullets there. They come from the respective regulation. And then finally, each COC must evaluate the outcomes of projects funded under the ESG program and the COC program in its jurisdiction and report to HUD. So again, we're getting back to that evaluation of performance. The fact that it exists in both program rules tells us that it's important to HUD. Next slide, please. And over to you, Erin.
Thanks, Mike. So now that Mike has covered what coordination requirements there are for the ESG and COC recipients, I'm going to discuss some optional coordination topics that you might want to consider. Next slide, Taylor. Thanks, Taylor. So in the next few slides, I'm going to get into some examples of what optional coordination could look like. But before we get there, I just want to highlight that having close collaboration between California HCD and the continuum of cares will are delivered, how funds are allocated, how you're collecting your data, aligning with communities on your priority populations, and making sure that the homeless service systems are being operated effectively as it pertains to your local and your HUD-defined system performance measures. Next slide. Thank you. So here's some examples of what optional coordination with COCs could look like. In the first example, we have the at-risk of homeless definition. I know Mike has trained on this a few times in the last couple of years, but as we've gone over in that at-risk of homeless definition, they have those additional 7 criteria that a client has to meet in order to be eligible for ESG homeless prevention services. And that last criteria in that definition is otherwise lives in housing that has characteristics associated with instability and an increased risk of homelessness as identified in the recipient's approved consolidated plan. So this is where we are all tying it back together now. So California HCD could establish additional qualifying criteria for that at-risk of homeless definition. And that criteria could be something that makes someone more at risk of becoming homeless, that might be specific just to that local area within the state. And that additional qualifying criteria that HCD could choose to set would allow some clients to qualify for homeless prevention services that they otherwise typically might not qualify for. And as a reminder, you can only include additional qualifying criteria if it's in HCD's consolidated plan. And if any of you are wondering, has HCD established any additional criteria for that risk definition? The answer is that they have not. But this is an example of what the types of collaboration could look like. The second example that we have here is discharge planning. So HCD and entities that are getting COC funds and that also happen to be a state or local government have to establish and implement discharge policies. And those policies have to keep people that are being discharged from publicly funded systems of care. So that could be incarceration, foster care, mental health hospitals, has to keep them from being discharged back into homelessness. If HCD and those local governments that are getting the COC funding are collaborating on discharge policies, then that would definitely help ensure that discharge plans are effective on a statewide scale. And the last example that we have here is in regards to system planning. Each COC must develop a plan that coordinates their housing and homeless services system within the geographic region that they're located in. At a minimum, the system the COC develops has to include strategies for outreach, engagement, assessment, shelter, housing, supportive services, and prevention. HCD could coordinate with COCs to make sure that ESG funds are used as effectively as possible to support that COC's entire system. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to move on to highlight another one of California's HCD policies, the ESG CoC Collaboration Policy. Next slide, Taylor. Thank you. So when we switch back over to Mike, I can drop a link to HCD's policy in our chat so that you can follow along. But just wanted to highlight that HCD, does understand the importance of collaborating with COCs for many reasons, which could include compliance and also making a positive impact on the systems that the COCs have designed to address homelessness within their communities. Unfortunately, because there are over 40 COCs in the state, HCD does not have the capacity to collaborate with all COCs on all topics. Therefore, if you take a look at HCD's collaboration policy, you'll find a section on how HCD will use a prioritization strategy that will guide their collaboration and engagement activities with the COCs. And we are going to cover that now on the next slide. If you don't mind, Taylor. Thanks. So here you'll see this prioritization table, and this table is also in HCD's collaboration policy, so you can refer back to this after today if you want to. So starting with that first column that's listed as high priority. So high priority refers to a regulation requirement or an optional collaboration topic that is critical to HCD's ability to implement the ESG program in an effective and compliant manner. So as you can see here, HCD's highest priorities are coordinated assessment, allocating ESG funds, performance standards and outcome evaluation for ESG projects, and planning and implementing HMIS. Those are HCD's highest priorities. In the next column, you have HCD's medium priorities listed. A medium priority refers to one of the regulation requirements or collaboration topics that is important for California's ESG program, but only needs maybe a lower level of interactive feedback from COCs. HCD's medium priority strategies are listed there, and they are the annual action plan, the consolidated plan, CAPA reporting, and then discharge and system planning. And in this last column, we have low priority. And low priority refers to collaboration topic that maybe isn't directly a requirement. It might not require consistent proactive outreach to COCs. So HCD's lowest priority items are the COC written standards and defining additional at-risk of homeless criteria. So this may also help provide context why HCD has not established any additional qualifying factors for that at-risk slide. It's considered a lower priority. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so I've already reviewed what the definitions were when I was looking at that table on the last slide. And like I said, they're in HCD's policy, so you can reference them later. Also in HCD's policy are certain conditions for their prioritization process. I'm going to go over those. So the conditions include that HCD will review that prioritization table on an annual basis, and also says that they reserve the right to amend that prioritization table at any time. Additionally, although the table lists the minimum level of effort for any given topic, HCD can, at their discretion, increase engagement on a particular topic or with the COC without amending their policy. And then lastly here, we have that HCD will target engaging with COCs that are actively under contract with HCD for receiving annual ESG funding. So COCs that are not actively under contract with HCD for annual ESG might get lower levels of engagement than indicated on that prioritization table on the previous slide. And again, that ties back to HCD not having the capacity to collaborate with every COC in the entire state, even though that would be an ideal situation. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who's going to walk us through collaboration practices.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to talk a little about the general guidelines now. So these are really just sort of guiding principles around how HCD approaches this interaction with COCs based on what you just saw in terms of how they prioritize different topics. So generally speaking, HCD will do the maximum extent possible to coordinate internally and with other state partners in its COC outreach efforts. And that's really to increase efficiency and prevent duplication of effort. And then related to that, what you see below is that HCD will, to the maximum extent practicable, leverage existing venues. So things like COC membership meetings, annual action plan listening sessions, office hours sessions, things like that. To solicit COC feedback. So what we're really saying with those two things is HCD wants to be as efficient as possible because, again, we recognize the high number of COCs throughout the state. So HCD will do what it can to use existing processes and venues that are already being implemented to gather public feedback, for these purposes so that they're not duplicating effort, not asking you for multiple things at multiple times related to this. So it's really all about efficiency. And that's both, I would think to the benefit of HCD and to the benefit of community partners. And then HCD may, at its discretion, seek individualized engagement from interested parties in any given COC when such engagement may increase equity or otherwise facilitate collection of critical feedback on topics identified in the policy. The concept behind that is that, so for example, if HCD is getting feedback from a particular continuum of care and the primary place they are getting feedback from happens to be, say, an official of the collaborative applicant agency, but HCD is also aware through data analysis or some other method that there is a particular population within that COC that disproportionately experiences homelessness. HCD might choose to look for organizations serving that population in that COC to seek additional feedback, again, with equity sort of being the focus there to make sure that they're getting all the information they need to make informed decisions about ESG allocation. So that's really what we're getting at with that general guideline. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we're going to talk specifically about tribal nations because HCD did want to be very intentional about including this explicitly in the policy. So for tribal nations specifically, California HCD first and foremost recognizes the sovereignty of tribal nations and seeks to engage directly with them as a critical aspect of its COC collaboration practices. So HCD expects COCs that receive funding for homeless response through them to actively include tribal nations and tribally designated housing entities that are inside of and or adjacent to their geographic areas in their planning, design, and implementation of the local homelessness response system. When collaborating with a given COC, HCD will directly solicit feedback from tribal nations and those tribally designated housing entities that are inside of and or adjacent to that COC's geographic area using the same prioritization and engagement techniques. So that's very similar to what I just said in turn. Like I gave the example of if a certain population is disproportionately experiencing homelessness. Along those same lines, HCD will reach out directly to tribal nations to solicit feedback in addition to the COC feedback that they're seeking. And then California HCD may, at its discretion, engage independently with tribal nations and tribally designated housing entities outside of the COC collaboration process prescribed by its policy to obtain feedback on collaboration topics identified in the policy. So again, we're just saying that HCD is writing into their policy that they intend to engage directly with tribal nations. And you know, they have the right to do that based on this policy, regardless of how the tribal nation is being integrated into the COC's overall operations. So again, just being very intentional about including tribal nations in this process. Next slide, please. So we talked about the topics that fall into the high, medium, and low priority areas. Here is what that means in terms of actually conducting outreach. So for high priority topics, all of the ones that fell in that high priority column, HCD will pursue collaboration through multiple venues and encourage active dialogue. So they're really looking for active feedback there. HCD will at least annually survey COCs to collect feedback on those high priority items. So you would expect a survey to be coming from HCD. They will hold an ESG office hours spotlight session at least once annually for each high priority item and solicit COC feedback during that session. So in this venue here, you would expect to see once annually each of those high priority items come up in the spotlight session, and then you would be asked for feedback. HCD may, at its discretion, facilitate listening sessions, focus groups, or other gatherings. Those could be in person or virtual to collect COC feedback and possibly to clarify previously gathered feedback related to high priority items. So basically, HCD can implement any venue that it chooses to actively solicit this feedback, and that can be particularly relevant to like the survey. So HCD might need to clarify feedback that it received through that survey process, and that's a way that could happen. HCD will perform proactive outreach to seek engagement from non-responsive COCs for high priority items, which basically means if it is a high priority item and the COC has been asked about it and the COC is not responding, HCD will keep poking and looking for a response. Where feasible, HCD will solicit feedback from COC membership, especially recipients and subrecipients of federal funding for homelessness response, in addition to COC leadership. So the real point there is HCD wants to make sure it's getting all of the information necessary. And you know, if the only place it's getting that feedback from in the COC is the leadership, whatever that looks like for a given COC. If they're able to, HCD might choose to reach out directly to COC membership for additional feedback. Next slide, please. So for medium priority topics, all of the things that were listed there in the middle, HCD will at least annually survey COCs to collect feedback on those items as well. So you could expect to see those on the survey. HCD may, at its discretion, seek individualized feedback from select COCs. That could be either in person, virtually, or via email. So basically what HCD learns from that survey might drive some additional individualized outreach depending on what the response looks like. And then HCD may, at its discretion, perform proactive outreach to seek engagement from non-responsive COCs for medium priority items. The main difference here from those high priority topics is the discretionary piece. So HCD has said for high priority items, they are definitely going to try and get your response. For for medium priority items, it's at their discretion. They may choose to do outreach to sort of poke at the COCs and try to get that feedback, or they might not. They get to make that call. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the low priority topics. So for those, HCD may pursue active collaboration at its discretion. So they might perform active outreach, but if they choose not to, they will otherwise collaborate on these topics only by COC request. Because if you remember the definition there, the topics in here are the ones that are they're not super high priority and also might just be COC requirements. And so HCD will be responsive to COC requests related to these items, and they will reply in a timely manner as it's feasible. So basically, if you're a COC and you are trying to meet your collaboration requirement and you reach out to HCD and it's one of these low priority topics, HCD will respond to you as feasible. They're not going to ignore it. However, these low priority topics are the ones where they otherwise aren't really going to perform active outreach unless they happen to choose to for a given year. So that is what we have, I think. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now we can open it up for questions.
All right, give me one moment if you don't mind, everyone, and I will take down our slides and get us ready for our discussion. All right, I'm just scanning our chat. Looks like we were able to answer Albert's question in the chat. Hopefully, Albert, you can see that. I don't see any more questions. Let's wait just a few more minutes for any to roll in. Still no more questions. Did anybody want to come off mute and discuss anything? Any further questions? All right, we don't see any questions coming in. As always, if you do have questions after the session, reach out to your ESG annual team or your ESG CV grant admin. And we thank you for your participation. And please remember, a quick survey will launch as you exit this session. So please don't hesitate to include any suggestions you may have on that survey. These survey results help HCD provide useful content and needed technical assistance and training. And we hope you have a wonderful day and great rest of your week. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Aaron and Mike, for your wonderful presentation.